welcome to the session anyway. We've got 45 minutes. Hopefully you've already had some thought-provoking insight in whatever you've been to so far. We're hoping to build on that and give you some more insight. But because we've got quite a small group, it would be great to just make this session interactive. So what we'll do is we've got three presenters. We're going to pause at the end of each section and just ask questions. Well, if you ask questions or if you want further clarification, please just feel free at the end of each session. We're going to quickly introduce each other, and we've also got another colleague downstairs. Between us, I think I worked out we have more than 100 years of supply chain experience, Andy, sorry. I think most of it's with him, actually. I didn't say that, really. And also IT implementation projects. Tony here. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, Tony?
So yeah, nice to meet you, Tony Barsham. My background is Accenture and IBM. I was a consumer products exec at IBM, and I've been working with SupplyVue for a couple of years, more on the commercial side.
So he's going to take the piece right at the end, which is just a 5-minute slot to do a brief sales pitch on SupplyVue. But the rest of the session is focused on this question here and the 3 specific points that we will hope to have a discussion point as we go through. So I'm going to take the first bit, which is really just around asking the question of, well, what's happening? What's happening in the current environment? I'm not going to dwell too much on it because I think we're all experiencing the pain at the moment. And then Andy will move on to the more important section is, why is that happening? And what can you do about that? And it's the what that is the really exciting piece in terms of, right, how do we move forward? And then clearly Tony would do the bit at the end to just explain to you that SupplyVue does all of that. So without further ado, I will go on to the next slide, hopefully. If I can work out how to move this thing forward. Were they making this work last time, or should I just do it the old?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll use it the old-fashioned way. Okay, as I said, I'm not going to dwell too much on this. Everybody knows that we're experiencing a lot of pain at the moment. I mean, we've gone from COVID to obviously all of the issues with supply chain, demand and supply shifts, etc. And now everybody's experiencing the pain with high inflationary pressures. But the problems seem to be hitting harder and faster. We can see that generally we've got fewer planners in our organisation, so those guys are really under the cosh, trying to really make sense of it all. And what we see is that we're getting more and more data, and actually it's the insight that we need from data. We don't need more data, we just need to understand what is it telling us and what can we do about it and how do we move forward, because currently we're seeing that things are non-standardized, it's hidden in many places. We've got no access to tools, well, we've got some access to tools, but we really need access that really allows us to have that insight and enable us to really move forward. So it's about really enabling our supply planners to do the job that we need them to do. I'm going to... so people are implementing big IT projects. People know that APO is being sunsetted in 27, so there is a lot of activity and investment in planning systems. But the problems don't seem to be going away. And what we see is actually the biggest problem comes from the fact that we've got poor synchronization. And I'm going to explain what does that actually mean. Poor synchronization happens in 2 areas. First of all, it's the information flow down your supply chain, and then it's the product flow back up your network. So what we're seeing with people that we work with, and certainly my background is I've worked for P&G for 25 years in many end-to-end supply chain roles. I was the supply chain director for Philips for many years. What we see is that, first of all, that information flow down your supply chain, every time that signal is touched, it's made worse. There is huge bullwhip. And guess what? Because that information is getting worse, right down at the end of your supply chain, the signal is hugely volatile because people are just manually intervening, trying to overwrite what their planning systems are saying. So first of all, you've got poor information flow down your myriad of IT systems. And what you've got then correspondingly is poor product flow back up your network because you've got all your independent parts of your end-to-end supply chain operating at different cycle speeds that aren't coordinated. And so you end up with all of these issues. As a result, you're suffering from high stocks. We call it high buffers between each of the nodes within your supply chain. And or you've got long frozen periods, or you've got more capacity than you need in your factories, or more warehouse space than you actually need. And what we see with many clients that we're working for, it's not just around kind of 5-10% too much inventory. Sometimes it's up to 40%. But actually, inventory is not the focus at the moment. It's cost with you guys. It's about how do we make sure that we're doing things in the most cost-effective way across our network. We're using our resources in the most efficient way. So what we see is that even though supply chains and businesses are integrating their supply chains, this poor synchronization means that we are misaligned, and it's that misalignment of information systems and your organization that is then causing these issues. And the specific issues that we see first and foremost is conflicting objectives. So for example, if you're operating in quite a siloed way, you may have your manufacturing looking at, well, I want to optimize manufacturing. So they will then potentially have long production runs, high costs, and all they're doing then is either passing the problem up or down the supply chain. So you're producing too much stock, putting it too much or the wrong stock into the warehouses, and then lo and behold, it's sitting in the wrong places because it's in the wrong location. So you're having to expedite product around just to get it into the right location. So first and foremost, it's around actually we've got conflicting objectives and KPIs. We're also around a lack of focus on just making sure that there's a clear handoff across the network. And then finally, what we're seeing is actually conventional MRP systems just can't effectively cope with that level of instability in data, etc. So actually, that's part of the issue why you're getting poor product flow. So I've introduced what's happening, what we're going to start talking about, and I'm going to hand over to Andy. Well, I'll pause there first of all. Does that resonate with people? Are you all nodding your heads and vehemently agreeing? Is there some key things that particularly resonate more than other things before we move on to Andy's piece, which is all around, and there's a way to resolve this?
Are any sort of key issues that you're dealing with, or key goals you want to achieve? Just maybe just direct sort of
I think
what we'll talk about.
You just mentioned was that an ERP system, particularly our SAP, is very rigid.
Yep.
You know, it has master data and it has lead times and that sort of
yep.
thing. You can't deal with the fact that historic lead times might be different and they might actually change in the future. So it might be 1 week for the next week and then it goes up to 6 weeks or whatever. So it's not dynamic enough
yep.
to be able to deal with those.
Good point. Would have paid you £10 to raise that point. So, so it's a good point. Anyone else wrestling with any problems related to this? Or should we just carry on?
I think it's just cost
yeah.
at the moment.
Cost? Okay, yeah. Okay.
With the economic climate,
yeah.
It's the key
fine.
focus is reducing
yeah.
costs.
Yeah. Okay.
Having a crystal ball would help as well.
Crystal ball and a magic wand, and then you need both, and then
Because there's so many disruptive influences on demand and
yes.
supply.
Yeah.
And probably most people in the room are dealing with FMCG.
Yes.
So fast moving means you've probably got inbuilt dynamic supply chains to respond actually very quickly. But in a slow moving consumer goods environment, you are the small fluctuation can mean you do end up with either obsolescence or availability issues.
Okay.
Everything
All right, let's see if we can touch on that. Okay, so I'm Andy Birtwistle. So I founded SupplyVue. I think the thing that was burning with me in terms of supply chain was the frustration of just working in supply chain for so many years and not seeing the organisations move forward. Just have the same problems, everyone firefighting, everyone just transacting, and actually not making any real strategic step forwards, despite lots of attempts at writing new operating models and buying new systems and bringing in consultants, and it all ended up being the same. So we're trying to work out how do we just break through that, and that's really what we try and do in SupplyVue. With simple solutions, simple cost-effective add-on solutions to maybe the main systems. That's kind of where we're coming at. And the key things that we want to address are to get the product flowing much more easily through the supply chain with less human touch, so policy driven, and using the systems that we've invested in. Do it without impacting cost. So, and put in policies and things. Yes, you might well get some inventory benefit because you're sorting out the inventory parameters, but do it with a view of creating some stability and predictability so that ops can actually then start doing the good practice, shop floor SMED and changeover cost reduction and just efficiency work, doing that on a stable platform. So it's creating the stability so that you can actually engineer cost out is probably where we're really coming from. And then if you do create the stability and create clear policies, you'll get much better use out of your systems. Actually start using your systems properly and not be always working around them and invest in ERP and then find everyone's doing all the work in spreadsheets and then typing the final answer into the system when you've worked it out. So actually make use of the systems because the systems are really good, but it's just how you've set them up and using them. And I think the parameter point is the key point. So if you put poor parameters in, the systems will not run well, and then people will stop using them. It's kind of those are the kind of things that we're focused on addressing. And our way of doing it, so is synchronized for success, is kind of our mantra. So we kind of got, well, I've got one trick with supply chain management, which is basically work everything on rhythm wheels and production wheels, but set that right across the supply chain, so you can get a cadence, and so it's everyone knows what's meant to be happening when, and create that simplicity and those rules, and that's when you can start driving. You stop making fewer mistakes, and you can then with that pattern, people know what's meant to be happening, and you can start engineering that process and improving it. So it's like a base on which you can really start moving forward. So I think that's kind of the premise of how we improve supply chains. Now the next trick is how you move on to the next slide.
Shall I do that while you...
So everything is production wheel based. So what we do is we take people's data and we design a production wheel, but line by line in the factories, which will be the optimal way of running that line. And we'll talk about objective functions, whether you want lowest inventory or lowest cost or lowest carbon. So it does depend what you want, what the final answer is. So maybe big batches if I want to reduce cost, much smaller batches with more changeovers if you want more service, if you're more service oriented. But that's a business choice. It's not the methodology isn't saying you must have fast wheels. It's what you want to achieve. And then set that objective by production line and then synchronize the whole supply chain around that. And it gives you that benefit of knowing when you want to make things, so you can make your final decision on what you make, the quantity you make, right at the last minute. So it means you can become very demand driven. You've got the latest picture of the supply chain, and you're making actually what's needed. So you can become very demand driven, but also you're very cost focused because you've got the ideal sequence for the production line. So it's to get that wheel, fix the drum beats for the main products, so you actually generate stability inside the organization. So that this actually works very well in a disrupted world, because what you're doing is you're actually creating nice rhythm and template and drum beat in parts of the business where you can do, and then where there is real sort of black swan events, they're real events, and then you can focus on dealing with those. But the rest of it is stable. Whereas if you don't have this approach, it's probably all a little bit chaotic, and you get queuing effects, and you just get into difficulty. If you've got 60% of your business into a nice stable rhythm, you can focus on the real problem or the new problem in the business. So it's to create that stability, get everything coordinated, and then what we also do is that, so those are the kind of the fixed order cycle rhythm products. when you're designing that wheel, you're obviously grouping things by format and also maybe by the product. So that's when you know you can slot in the sort of the stranger product. So you slot them into the wheel template where they will fit. And what that gives is, even for make-to-order products, it makes them predictable because you know when their next turn is going to come round in the wheel. So you can actually be really precise on the lead time. So it even generates a lot of predictability with not a make-to-stock environment. So it just makes the relationship with customers a lot clearer. So it deals with all of those items. It generates stability and helps you. Yes, there will be disruption in the world, but at least you're on a solid, more robust basis. And then the benefit you get is that manufacturing then are getting the demand placed onto them exactly as they want it. And the job is just then focused on executing that wheel and becoming better at it. And because it's a stable pattern, that's when you want to apply your manufacturing excellence work on the line, get changeovers down, reduce waste because the pattern's predictable, and work on the uptime and the run speed of the lines, and drive OEE on a stable platform. And then all operations, it should work like that. So we've done similar things with warehouses. If you're placing demand and understand the rules, how you want the workload to be placed, inbound. Inbound is the easiest one, inbound into warehouses. What are the constraints? How do you want to level it? You can again help the operation be more efficient because you're placing the workload onto them in a way that will suit them. So that's the idea throughout all of the approach we take. It's always asking the operation or your supplier, how should we place demand onto you? How should we order on you so that you can be more effective and efficient? When you do that with the manufacturing and you're placing it governing the demand, that's where you get the opportunities to actually get some win-win, because we collapse frozen periods and scheduling periods because it's already pre-scheduled. So you haven't got that. You don't need the horizon to start grouping and reordering the products to put them into the right structure. They're already there. So you're still helping manufacturing efficiency, but you've got your win in terms of a customer-focused supply chain manager, because your response times are much shorter. And also manufacturing tends to be, and suppliers tend to be much more reliable because they're just executing around the same standard rhythm wheel. So we take away that variability of supply coming in, and again that will make the supply chain a lot more resilience and can stand shocks, because again there's a pattern that suppliers are used to, the factories are used to, and that's their focus. We create that resilience. All of this has inventory benefits, and it also, with the rhythm wheels, gives us the chance to actually kind of cross-dock the faster movers straight through the network, because they're being made to the same drum beat. You can coordinate the replenishment timings as you go through the network, and you can convert some locations from stock locations to transshipment locations. So there's opportunities to take infrastructure out of the network because you've got everything coordinated. And it's actually only needs stocking points where there's lack of coordination. So overall, it's a strategy to create stability in terms of the plan, but it's with the aim of taking cost and efficiency and waste out of the process through creating that stable platform. I think there's one other point we want to make here. So how do you realise that in the business? It's all about managing the parameters. So what we do is our solver that solves the calculation of how to calculate the wheel basically is a parameter manager of the planning tools. So when you calculate the wheels that you want, design it against your objective function, whether it's service or cost, that will come out with lot sizes and frequencies and inventory parameters. And it's those parameters then you just update in your planning systems, and that's where the plan will then run against that template. So what it gives you then is a tool and a capability to keep your parameters up to date, which is what you need. And then it's just a choice about how frequently do you amend them. Can you judge whether the business or the capability has changed, so you actually need to update. So you just need to set the parameter values on where do you need to update.
Can I just ask a
Yeah.
question? I mean, certainly what we see with a number of people we talk to is that parameter setting isn't done very regularly. In fact, we walk into some companies and they just still have blanket settings, parameter settings, and there isn't a cadence to ensure that they are up to speed. Does that resonate, or are you on top of your parameters and policy setting within your planning systems? No, I'll definitely get a no here.
Yeah.
It's one thing having a policy about what to do with the system. It's another having a policy what to do with the people who, you know, if they're not going in and changing the background parameters, they're probably changing everything with a red pen and a piece of paper saying, I don't want 4016. It's that human.
It's that manual intervention that is causing the issue.
Yes. But they're not manually intervening on the parameters, is what you're saying.
They should be adjusting parameters and policies.
Not.
Getting those right, then the system will do the work.
How? That's
Yeah, well,
the question.
Yes.
Exactly.
And there's actually some quite complicated maths and stuff in getting some of this right. And more often than not,
And I think the turnover of people in these types of roles is where you lose knowledge.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yes. Okay.
Need to discipline them if they change it too much.
So that's why we kind of recommend the production wheels. And then, I think I just wanted to make these points that it's quite often when you talk about production wheels, people think, oh, it's just for inventory reduction, but it isn't. It's to create the stability, but against what you want to achieve. So if it's a cost, if cost's the most important thing, or waste or carbon, then model and design the wheel for the optimal cost position. So maybe it will be slightly larger batches and fewer changeovers, but they'll be sequenced properly and minimise waste. So it's a business choice and actually the results and the outcome you want. It's not dictated by the methodology.
And that objective function may change by value stream.
Yes. And change by production line, different line. You might very well want to be your low cost, lean line. Another line you might want to have faster changeovers and be your customer service line. So design it according to your business objectives, and we can do the maths on that. You obviously you've got to understand your input data. So you've got to understand the cost of changeovers, which is an interesting thing, because if you're always making different changeovers, it's probably really difficult to actually know precisely what those costs are. So I think one of the advantages are when you start setting your wheel and start working this process, you can actually really see the true cost of waste and the timing of waste and where you're going wrong in terms of the process, and get much better understanding of those activities. So I think it will focus you down on the actual changeovers that are important and what you need to engineer. And then the thing that, not only just designing the wheel, the thing that you really do need to take into account are the minimum lot sizes and minimum batch sizes. So it's actually, in the end, it's actually quite a complex equation you're trying to solve, because you want to get the rhythm and the frequency, but you also need to batch and align the coordination of the like type products so they're all in the same groups. And if you can do that, that's when you're really winning, because you've got it all coordinated properly for the factory. So that's what we take into account when we do the production wheel design. So I've talked about the factory, and it's to create the perfect information, so the factory's no longer kind of got the excuse, if it only wasn't for the customer I can run my factory well. You're actually sorting out that demand pattern that you're placing onto the factory. They are then executing against the wheel, and then I touched on it. This then gives you the opportunity to really look how you're managing the flow of product through the supply chain. So again, typically we will put the sort of the A-line fast movers, coordinate the replenishment processes and the when demand is calculated in line with that drumbeat, so you can just push them through to to the end of the supply chain. And then maybe for the slow movers, you're just doing the normal stuff if you're holding it back further and you're just topping up against a stock. So it just gives you again, because you've got the pattern and the rhythm, it makes it so much easier to manage the inventory and set the inventory policies. And you tend to take away the supply side variability. So you're only dealing with forecast error. And also, because you've probably collapsed the lead times and frozen periods, you're able to make much more accurately because you're looking less far ahead when you're actually making your quantity decision. So it will give inventory production opportunities, but ideally, more importantly, it could take out large warehouses and collapse them down and have transshipment points for main movers and just have a warehouse for slow movers. So there's opportunities to take infrastructure out.
Andy, does it
Yep.
give you any insights into raw material
Yep, so
opportunities?
Is that page down?
next slide. Inbound. So the effect we get, we tend to get a magic effect on inbound because you've stabilised the schedule. Without doing anything, we tend to sort of focus on the finished goods supply chain and trying to get the rhythm wheel working and the stability. And because you stabilise the schedule, then the demand pattern onto suppliers is suddenly becoming useful. Because again, probably your suppliers, or certainly when I was a planner, the suppliers would take no indication or notice of the MRP plan we used to send them. And they'd basically say, you don't know what you want. We did at that moment, but then we'd change the plan all the time. And so it was fairly useless to them. So I think it just gives the same benefit to the suppliers. It's just a knock-on benefit of creating that stability. And if you can then gain their trust by giving them more useful information and more stable information, you've got the benefit of probably then being able to collaborate with your key suppliers and work things out a lot better. So I think it will create some resilience in the supply chain because the demand signal will be more predictable. But I think with that and getting to more stability, you can then start looking at things like number of suppliers, sources, and actually doing some resilience engineering into your supply chain as well, and being able to better model it because again you've got a more stable pattern of the demand you're going to place on them. So I think it's a matter of creating the platform so you can do some of this work more effectively. So I think that's the summary is, if you work in this kind of environment where reasonably complex portfolio, batch manufacturing, this technique works really, really well. It doesn't just deal with the sort of make-to-stock items, it can create that predictability and you can fit into your design and slot in the strangers and the make-to-order items and create that stability. With the fixed order, we split it between a fixed order cycle, so we're trying to create stability two ways. Main products fix the cycle and vary the quantity, and the others fix the quantity, so you can do kitting, basically, on inbound. Then you can have very short lead times on your finished goods supply chain for your stranger items. So we always look which way can you create that stability, which lever, and you don't want variable quantity, variable lead time. So it's make your choice. And it gets those benefits. It's kind of it's taking out the noise, the buffers, the lead times. So you kind of magically get quite a significant inventory reduction. But more importantly, as we said, it creates that platform so you can start attacking operational efficiency, which I think is the main thing you want to do. And I think it creates an understanding of how you want to operate. So I talked about operating models, but I think it really can create your way of working in your business and something that is easy to understand and easy to communicate, and people can see how the supply chain is then trying to operate.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just then talk about this then. So that's what we try and do and how we solve the supply chain problems. It's just a little bit about SupplyVue, is that what we've built then as one of our product offerings, is just that designer to design the wheel, take the data and design the wheel, and then update the other planning tools. So it's actually a really quick and simple implementation. You just need to it's fairly simple data set, and then the output then is just managing the parameters. And in particular, IBP, which you know well, has got the parameters just waiting there to be managed, which is the make, not make field on the production line planning. So we can create the rhythm very, very easily in IBP, and you'll get the benefit very, very quickly.
And other planning systems.
Yeah, and there are other planning systems, but yeah, that's the main one we've worked with. And then you get choices whether do you want to use our solver then to calculate the inventory, or you use the planning tool's own inventory settings. But what you've got is the lead times and the cycles, and then you can just calculate the inventory. The final inventory calculation is not a big deal. It's getting the rhythm wheel right. So it's a really nice add-on to existing tools, and I think it really helps you get the value out of that investment in your main core planning engines.
Is there any questions about the whole approach around production cycles and the how that Andy's talked through? Yes?
Yeah, product granularity. When you say product,
Right, yeah.
are we talking SKU? Are we talking product family?
So we tend to model around kind of the master SKU level. So you've got the history of the SKUs, but in the end you're creating the rhythm for the individual SKU. But the SKUs are grouped together if they're different formats, and then grouped again if they've got the same actual product in them. So you take into account those things, but in the end the output from the modelling are the parameters for the individual final SKU. How frequently is this one made? Which weeks is it made in? And you'll see then it's grouped together with like type SKUs.
Based on, I suppose, defined characteristics.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes. Whatever's important, yeah. So it tends to be the same format and the actual same product you're actually putting into a...
So SupplyVue, for example, will
Yeah.
segment products on a 36-box segmentation. So look at the demand characteristics of every single SKU, and then we'll group those SKUs.
Yeah.
If that's what...
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have a high product churn, and you're constantly changing your product catalogue in the instance of one-to-one custom product.
Yeah, so this is the kind of the master SKU idea. So we tend to model on that master SKU, and then the individual churn of the individual SKUs underneath them. They all follow the same rules as the master SKU, and that tends to work. Yeah.
The key questions.
Yeah.
I saw some other questions flying around specifically the approach, and then we can maybe poke a little bit more into what SupplyVue does.
Maybe a small question, Andy. On the previous slide,
Yeah.
I could see you were talking about a weekly and 2 weekly being
Yes.
most optimal. What's the thinking there?
So it's to try and get some flow and rhythm and repeating. So if the cycles are too slow, then from the kind of the factory point of view, there isn't a cadence to work on. So it's to generate some sort of speed and flow. And I think there's sort of some standard sort of consumer goods anyway, benchmarks out there, where you say you want to try and get 80% of your volume on a 2-week cycle or faster. And then you've kind of got the flow through. Yeah. Yes.
Will be daily, for example.
Right, yes. Yeah.
My other question links to that was going to be around where you've got integrated supply chains and multi-site in particular. How will that kind of work? So if you've got the same product come out of 3 sites, for example,
Right, okay, so we deal with that on the, so we've got, it's either alternative sourcing or parallel sourcing, so we work that into the rules, yeah. And most of the problem on that, so you've got to split the volume across and have the rules for that, and then decide what is actually your lead time, because it's got when you calculate the inventory, you need one number. So you need to know what is the business rule on how to follow that. But you can deal with that. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions before we...
So I think it's not new stuff in terms of the approach. but it's with the systems capability now in the world, you can start doing this kind of thing at scale. And I think that's what... And you can stick to it.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
My company
Yes.
is we have a lot of this
Yeah.
in place, but we're constantly breaking
Yeah.
the plan because
Yeah.
the demand isn't shaped up
Yeah.
front.
Right. Yeah. But it's getting control of that. I always use the word governing the demand so that you can stick to it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So just very quickly
Yes.
on this, I mean, we really need to talk
Oh,
about the solver. It's the solver that would sit alongside a planning system, creating the parameters. We do have a planner, a supply planning tool for organisations that don't really have a conventional planner. And then the Navigate tool is the analytics and the simulator that sits around it. The other thing I would add to this is, we can do, a lot of clients come to us, we do a POC, and we could probably do a POC in 4 weeks, right? If the data's there, we can set the twin up and spit out the analytics from the Navigate and the solver. We can show the benefits that can be realised. So, it's a very sort of easy way of starting, right? It's not an SAP, love SAP as we do. It's not an SAP program that takes months and months. And you can pick a slice of the business, maybe a manufacturing line. We work with probably a sort of 500 million pound manufacturing based in London. We took one of their manufacturing lines. Within 4 weeks, we were able to model it and show that by changing the cadence on the production wheels, as Andy explained, we could deliver benefits, and we're now implementing it. So it's a pretty focused solver. We sometimes use the Navigate tool to support that. Planner for clients who don't have their own sort of supply planning capability. So that's what we offer as SupplyVue.
Do you also offer then the implementation support?
Yes.
So I grew up with a people process systems approach. I guess we're talking here, people policy systems almost.
Yeah.
And you've got the system, we need the policies in the background, and then to the people point, how do you get them on board so they understand that they're adding value, you reward them for the value they're adding, and you stop them fiddling with it?
So the way we tend to operate, so we'll use our people as kind of expert advisors, and if it's a bigger project, we tend to do that with consultants we know. So it just depends on the size and scale of the project. But we like to stay close because we want to make sure the client gets the results, because that's what we need.
But a key part of the culture change, because it is a culture change, is about getting your people to do different tasks and potentially upskilling them to do some of those tasks if they're not used to looking at certain bits of insight and they're not sure what to do with it. So a key part of the approach that we take is, first step is a POC. It's to show people, look, this is the art of the possible, and also with the modelling capability that's built within the solver and Navigate, it gives people a chance in a completely virtual environment to have a play, to play with, right, if I alter this parameter, what's the impact? And actually, it's that ability to play virtually within a digital twin that helps reinforce what are the benefits and what's the impact. And so it is part of an education process in the way that we approach it with people. You set up the virtual replica, you physically then can model and test things, you then implement in an actual showcase your virtual one line, and that's what we did with TechDT. In fact, John Badette's here floating around. I'm sure he'll talk to people and tell you what we did. You showcase it and people then realise the actual impact, and then you expand it out. So from one line you then take it to the factory, to the markets, multiple markets, and then scale it. But it is the approach that is also about the culture change, to win the hearts and minds. Any other points or questions? Does that all resonate? And is that something, are there things that you think, hang on a minute, this really is that would help me, or actually I'm still sitting here, can't quite see how this would work in my environment? What's people thinking? Have we stunned you all into silence? are you already? You said you're already implementing some of it, but it's
Well, like we have at our sites, we have some of those tools in place, but it's just following it, and because of the challenges with APO and min-max kind of parameters, and that as soon as you get that signal to make that, it's like, oh, we'll just redo the entire plan, so it's really sticking to that.
A lot of the issue with APO is you can't then model. You set it up and you just run it, and so you haven't got a choice. But the value and the power of actually you can offline model and test things, and it takes a matter of minutes to then see the impact of your plan rather than having to wait for the overnight run for it to then actually implement. So that's the power of actually getting people to trust it.
Yeah, and that's the key, really.
Yeah. Any other thoughts and comments?
You mentioned about people who have their own planning system. So like APO, for example.
Yes.
But then the solver bit talks about production modelling. So what's it actually sending? What sort of parameters is it sending back into your planning?
The planning calendar. So, like the planning calendars, the length of those calendars. So telling the system, assume you're making this week, therefore, and then you're going to make again in 2 weeks. So when it's calculating the amount to make this week, it knows the next manufacturer's 2 weeks' time. So it's going to look 2 weeks forward in.
So
to calculate.
When you say calendar, so is it actually sending back suggested production
timings? Yes.
Plans. Then,
it's a template for the production plan. Yes.
Right.
Make these products this week in this sequence.
And how does it deal with the constraints then that you might have in that?
So, but the planning systems will then solve against those constraints. So the planning tool will then know I'm making this week, next manufacturer's 2 weeks' time, and it will calculate the amount. And then when it's constraining, so well, if I want to bring it forward, my production 2 weeks earlier, I will smooth it onto that.
But Andy, just you
but
should
they
explain,
do
we have the
solve it.
constraints, right? So we model all the constraints as well.
Yes.
We don't have just some constraint plan that then goes, you know.
So in the modelling, it'll all
fit
based on the demand. And then the planning tool will just work against that template.
And the other key thing is, based on the cycles, we then obviously create the inventory buffers, because the inventory buffers are forecast variability and cycle time. So that all of those parameters are created by the.
It doesn't change the way the planning systems operate. It's just we're just making use of the parameters in them, so they work in the same way, they constrain in the same way, and they follow that template, which is then quite nice.
Okay. Was that helpful? Please reach out to if you want to take a picture of us, either via email or through the website. There's constant updates on latest thinking, on the work that we're doing, and also the future work around, as Andy mentioned, it's not just about managing inventory cost and service, it's now carbon footprint.
Yeah, we're looking at how we...
And SupplyVue has now that capability to look at, right, my business objective function may be carbon for a particular value chain. So it helps you then, and your planners, to then understand, well, if I make that choice around maybe a different production cycle, this is the impact then on carbon, cost of carbon. Very good.
Thank you.